Technology partners are the unsung growth heroes. This is Partner-Led Growth, a show dedicated to empowering partners to discover the solutions their clients need while growing their ability to take their own revenue to the next level. Your host, Ben Spector, a passionate member of the MSP community for over a decade, will help you navigate the growing partner ecosystem. Partner-Led Growth is sponsored by Zomentum, the revenue platform transforming the partner sales ecosystem, one solution, one vendor, one partner at a time.
Hello and welcome to Partner-Led Growth, the podcast. I'm your host, Ben Spector. Today's guest is a cybersecurity veteran in more than one way. More on that later. The founder and leader of one of Inc. 5000's fastest growing private companies in America. He's published articles in the National Defense Magazine and US Cybersecurity Magazine, among many others. Currently, he's the founder and CEO of Ad Lumen. Is Robert Johnston. Thank you very much for joining us today, Robert.
Thank you for having me on, Ben. I really appreciate it.
So look, first question from me, you now are heavily involved with cybersecurity firm. You've launched your own SaaS vendor. Previously, you've clearly got a lot of cybersecurity pedigree and experience behind you. So what, in your view, is the biggest problem facing MSPs that are trying to grow into that second S to become an MSSP today?
I think there's probably two main problems. The first is time, and the second is expertise. As MSPs are beginning to grow into that second S, as you so eloquently put it, they're finding that there is a time gap and that there's sometimes a bit of a skill or capability gap that's there as well to deliver to their customers. So what these MSPs are really looking for is a solution that is able to fill in all of their cybersecurity skill gaps, still at the same time providing them the access and introspection into data and reporting to deliver their ancillary services to their end customer client as well.
Gosh, and so how do we go about solving that challenge using technology?
I think if you're doing business in the channel, in the channel space, MSPs, of course, included, is you, as a vendor, have to keep in mind that there are three customers that you are servicing in order to deliver your product or tech-enabled services or the combination thereof. You have the end customer or client. That could be, a community bank or a regional credit union, or something like that, right? So that's your first customer, the end customer client. You have your second customer, who is the partner, right? The channel partner, whether it's the MSP, the MSP trying to become an MSSP. And the third customer you are servicing is the delivery of potentially your own or someone else's tech-enabled services through your platform. So you have to build the technology that allows all three of those organizations to collaborate and work together within the same technological ecosystem, all in harmony.
And so how do the MSPs and technology partners, they're coming into this fight, frankly, without the experience, but also you mentioned without the time, how can they leverage the technology to solve that challenge and to get closer to being an MSSP, but especially, without opening themselves up to too much risk?
Yeah, 100%. So we find today MSPs are delivering some kind of services. They started, of course, delivering general IT-based services, desktop support, networking, all of those basic information technology and audiovisual services that a business would need to get up and running. Then came security. It became kind of a very important portion of many of these MSPs business lines, right? And so, as they deliver that, we find that they're doing some services. Some people want a complete offload. So it almost works like a pass-through, like a resell of a feature-rich, white glove, fully managed concierge service delivered just through them. Some people want more of a hybrid model, right? And I think one of the unique things we do at Ad Lumen is we really facilitate these hybrid models. As you're growing into the MSSP, maybe you don't want to start with a 24/7, 365-day MDR service, managed detection and response service. Maybe you don't want to start with that, right? Maybe you just want to start doing 5 days a week during the day, right? And so we here at Ad Lumen have obviously like an augmentation service, right? Where, we'll take the night shift, we'll take the weekends, we'll take the days you don't want, right? And you can kind of step into things slowly. As you take a look at the broader security operations space, tech-enabled service augmentation is what I'll call it, branches out into everything from patch management to vulnerability scanning to security awareness training to MDR, managed detection and response, to SIEM, log management. So all of those services, in order to get them as they're kind of stepping closer to MSSP, all of those services need to be delivered kind of in a feature-rich, fully managed way, but also in what I would call a service augmentation way, which just augments the current existing capabilities of the MSP.
And so when we talk about augmenting the current capabilities, how do you think MSPs are currently dealing with security at the moment?
So I believe, it is certainly my thesis that everyone just got started kind of in the antivirus space, and delivering like EDR antivirus technologies. But now there's been a huge heavy push in the MSPs delivering integration and security services through mainly, I would say, like Google Cloud and Office 365 or Azure Cloud and Azure delivered services. So we find a lot of MSPs that are delivering some form of at least security monitoring, right? And it can be as simple as I'm just monitoring Azure alerts, right? Because the end customer may not want to monitor those Azure alerts or may not have the time. They're doing other things, so they're relying on the MSP to monitor those Azure alerts. The same thing goes with Ad Lumen, right? And our MDR services. We may work exclusively with the MSP to handle security breaches or security incidents and investigations, things like that, where they are taking part in the investigations as well. I would say probably the biggest way that MSPs really contribute is not everything in security is what I would call, right of boom, right after a security breach has concluded. There's the proactive component, which is the security configuration component. This takes like man hours. It's things like configuring permissions, making sure that their account and identity ecosystem house is in order, configuring share permissions. All of these things are essential at stopping things like ransomware. And so you need an MSP really. If you find 1,000 at-risk shares, someone has to go fix those 1,000 at-risk shares, right? And the MSP is perfectly positioned, and they already have the capability to deliver that kind of service at a fee to the customer to go fix their 1,000 shares, making them more hardened towards typical security attacks like ransomware attacks.
You've mentioned a few acronyms along the way, 3 that I've scribbled down. You mentioned MDR, you mentioned EDR, and traditional AV. It would be really interesting to hear your perspective on the evolution of those security products through time and kind of what you see the future as there. I mean, my understanding is that we went from AV to EDR to MDR. Now people are starting to talk about XDR. Can you kind of take us through that journey and explain what each of those means?
Yeah, things definitely started with AV like back in the 90s, right? And AV was just very basic. Like there's a malware file that we have a hash for that we recognize, right? And if we recognize, we get rid of it. If we don't recognize it, we let it go, right? And so it was very kind of binary, black or white, yes or no, right? Now as like the threat landscape has changed, EDR entered. EDR was just like, look, your traditional AV is not where you need to be. You need this like black box recorder that essentially records everything that takes place on the endpoint. And then we can write some rules that, parses through all that information to find like subversive threats that made it past your AV. And then the next natural evolution, I think, was taking that black box recorder and those rules. They're certainly using data science to accomplish many of these objectives, a lot of these vendors as well. And so they attached like the blocking, I would call it the AV mechanisms onto the back end, onto their high fidelity alerts. So now you end up with, EDR. XDR is kind of the new one, where really I've got like a few issues with this space. One is XDR just became all the EDR vendors that tried to move into XDR, right? But if you can't really be extended, if you don't extend beyond the endpoint, right? And that's the thing. If you look at Ad Lumen, we say we're managed detection and response, right? We're really MXDR. We take the endpoint, we take the EDR solutions, and we take all of your cloud apps, all of your networking devices. We are the ones that are really truly extending beyond the endpoint, right? And then, of course, attaching a data lake on the back end to allow you that long range search horizon. I think that was the biggest probably change from EDR to XDR, was just kind of attaching a data lake back end that allowed the type of search horizons that you normally wouldn't get with an AV solution at all.
That makes sense, and thanks for explaining that, because I'm always conscious when people use a load of acronyms. I think there's an assumption that everyone out there also understands. Just because we're in the same industry, sure, everyone must understand what MDR and XDR is. So really, thank you for explaining that difference in the journey. Now, the last time we spoke, we had a really interesting conversation about regulated environments and how, putting it frankly, Ad Lumen as a solution, you said, really doesn't fit your micro businesses or anything under 100 employees typically. You said you can go a little bit smaller, but typically it's 100 onwards. And that led us into a really interesting conversation talking about MSPs that have the aspirations to start dealing with bigger clients and to start thinking more about regulated industries like banking and insurance, for example. What advice could you give to those MSPs that would help them understand the challenges they're going to face as they start to enter those bigger, more complicated environments?
We define this segment as, the middle market, or what I call the enterprise light market, right? That predominantly, almost exclusively, all use managed service providers or value-added resellers in some capacity. And you're talking everything, yes, from 100 employee kind of community bank, but also, a very regulated industry that Ad Lumen does very well in is like a 10-person dentist office. They're a medical organization, right? They're in a very regulated industry. And so therefore they have these deep kind of regulatory rules that they must comply with. And so, these regulated industries are interesting. And they're interesting because they experience four forces. And if you're an MSP, you've got to look to solve or help with these four forces. The first is increasing regulatory and compliance standards. Like the government, is not making regulations easier. They're not deregulating, right? They're increasing regulations, especially in the security industry, trying to raise the bar for security across regulated industries, right? You have decreasing capacity. So while these regulatory and compliance standards are becoming more burdensome on organizations, like organizations don't have the capacity to invest in the overhead for increasing people. So if you're a community bank and you have 2 people working in security, I would dare say that 10 years from now, you still only have 2 people working in security, despite maybe your own organic organizational growth. And the third, of course, is an increasing threat. And so in order to solve, all of these problems, Ad Lumen has an equitable access to data and reporting approach, right? Because if you're a regulated industry, you can't just outsource everything. Like, it's not an option. If you're a community bank, like, an auditor will come in once a year and they will say, I need you to show me that you know how to search for, an account that was created 6 months ago. And it's not then at that point, like, call my MSP, right? And say, hey, MSP, I need you to show me this. Like, that's not going to fly with the auditor. The auditor has to see you do it, right? That's the key. And so that's where that equitable access to data and reporting kind of comes into play, right? Many of these services out there, because they've OEM so much technology, the end client doesn't get access to anything, right? They're just kind of flying blind and leaning on the MSP or the vendor that sits behind the MSP to accomplish the job for them. In regulated industries, like that's not a viable option.
That makes sense. It's interesting you mentioned dentists with 10 employees as being a good example, because pretty much every time I see on any of the kind of MSP social threads anything to do with dentists, it seems that they are single-handedly the worst cybersecurity spenders on the planet. They refuse to invest anything into their infrastructure if everyone's to be believed. So look, perhaps either through ignorance or arrogance, a lot of our listeners may think they already have a solution to all of this. Where do you fit in? You've mentioned configuring Microsoft 365 and being able to deliver security through some of those platforms. If an MSP thinks they already have security nailed down because they're using 365, they've deployed Microsoft Defender, perhaps they're doing some kind of logging within 365. Where does Ad Lumen come in and how does it augment? Does it integrate with those kind of tools that they're already using?
Yeah, we integrate with all the tools they're already using, from the most austere endpoint to the cloud, right? To their cloud applications, whether it's Salesforce or AWS or Office 365, Azure. And we bring all that data in and we put a tech-enabled services team on top of it. And this is now what is called managed detection and response, MDR. MDR is an outcome-focused, an outcome-focused value proposition, right? Their job is to, in a fully managed way, detect breaches and then respond to those breaches, right? So Office 365 may hand out like an impossible travel, breach, saying essentially an account has been compromised. So for instance, Ben logs in from London, then 5 minutes later, you log in from Moscow. Like, this is a physical impossibility, right? Within 5 minutes, you can't travel from London to Moscow. So, your account may certainly be compromised and it needs to be disabled, the password changed, those kinds of things. And so Ad Lumen, the MDR service, will of course do all that for you at 3 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Eve or at Friday at 6 p.m. when breaches seem to most often occur. And so that is what I think is the biggest thing missing from MSPs, is the ability to deliver that level of service, or even the desire to deliver that level of service, and the expertise to really hunt through data, find really kind of stealthy type breaches and attacks. And I certainly have a few examples, even most recently. But that is where the MSP, I think, sometimes falls short. Sometimes they have some of the capability. That's where service augmentation comes into play. Sometimes they have none. Depends on their scalability, their size, and their business model.
Sure. And if the MSP is working with someone like Ad Lumen to do that augmentation, is there also an opportunity for them to be learning along the way? Can they use that as a pathway towards becoming a full MSSP in their own right?
Yeah. We're not just delivering our own tech-enabled service. We're equipping other security operations centers and other services to do their job, right? So that they essentially deliver, the same service, or some might even say a competing service. The reason why this model works is, the services market, whether it's security operations center as a service, SOC as a service, or MDR, it's regional and it's fragmented. If you're a small community bank in Texas, you want to work with your MSP that is in your town that delivers other services to you in Texas. Like, you may not want to work with RSOC in the DC area, in the Denver area, right? So that's the way you want to do business. And so if an MSP were to come to a platform like Ad Lumen, they can deliver the service fully managed and then kind of migrate into service augmentation, and then they can completely take it over. And our platform can operate with them as the service provider, as opposed to our services team as the service provider as well. And it works the same way. And they get the opportunity to learn the system. Now, the exciting thing about that is the revenue shift, right? The revenue shift goes to them now. Now they're getting more of the revenue share. Their business is becoming more profitable, and Ad Lumen is perfectly fine just retaining the software fees.
I was going to say that it was like, if you're gradually upskilling all of the MSPs to become MSSPs in their own right, is Ad Lumen essentially doing itself out of a job?
Well, we still deliver the technology and services, and there's still opportunity for augmentation, tech and services. I don't think, as you look at the market, that there will ever be a need where, tech-enabled services, there's not enough market share for everybody to do extremely well. And so I think it's more important to provide a menu of options that fit the needs of a variety of different channel partners within the channel. You have some that are very capable, provide all their own services. And then you have some that provide none of their own services. And then you have everything in between those two, right? And so we look at the market and we say, hey, we want to be able to service the entire breadth of channel, right? And so we are really proud of our, I think, ability to do that.
I introduced you at the beginning as being a veteran in more than one way. So one of the things I really want to explore is a little bit about your background and what's kind of brought you to where you are today. If I understand correctly, you were in the US Marine Corps for about 8 years. Can you tell me? Yeah, were you at all involved with cybersecurity back then?
I was, so that's where I would say I cut my teeth, right? And I went to the Naval Academy, and I graduated from the Naval Academy in 2008. And in 2008, security was a thing, but not really like you think about it today. You didn't hear about breaches in the news. Like the first kind of Chinese breaches were just happening around that time. Like they only had antivirus, that was like the solution, and like the world's most basic firewall, right? And these were the security technologies that you had available to you. And I took some courses. I was a computer science guy in college, and I really got interested in security. And I could tell from the beginning it was going to be big. You could just see it. It was interesting, and it was a big problem, and I could tell like it was going to be big, right? And I knew I wanted to do that for a career. And so throughout my Marine Corps career, I steered my, where I went and what I did within the Marine Corps to fit into that mold. I was the director of the Red Team, that was offensive security, right? Hacking our own networks to make them stronger. I went to the National Security Agency. I was doing incident response there. Got to do some really exciting things against like Russia and China, and work in a security operations center. Got to do all that kind of stuff. And so I left the Marine Corps after 8 years of doing a lot of cybersecurity, a lot of it in the intelligence community. And I went to CrowdStrike. I was at CrowdStrike for a little while. Got to do some exciting things there. Really great experience working for a fast growing kind of private company. And then, then I wanted to transition. I started I started Ad Lumen, and the rest is history.
I mean, when you say I started Ad Lumen, you make it sound like a really small piece of the puzzle. We just want to unpack that a little bit more. There's a massive difference between taking part in these exercises and training in the military to launching a hugely successful kind of global cybersecurity vendor. How did that actually come about? Was it someone you met, or what was the catalyst to that?
Yeah, there's I often rack my brain on this sometimes too. There's working in security, right? Which is where I was, deep industry expertise. And then there's the business of security. And the two things are they're linked, of course, but they're completely separate. And some people may be great operators, but terrible at the business of security, right? And then, some people seem to find that transition really well. So, I started the company in very late 2016, early 2017, but that's not saying much. It was just me back then, right? We have more than 100 employees today, right? So it's a vastly different kind of organization. And it is, it's a learning curve, and you meet a lot of people along the way, right? I met a co-founder that was interested, that like me gave up everything to go all in on the business. And then we grew this thing together over many, many years. And then you raise different rounds of funding and you hit different milestones. And it's a building process that doesn't take place overnight. It takes place over many years, for sure.
A conversation I've had a couple of times, which I think is quite an interesting one, is when you speak to an MSP owner who has a very specific challenge of their own within their business, and they think, why don't we start a SaaS product or create a SaaS product that solves the problem within our business? I'm sure it's not as easy as that, but what bit of advice would you give to someone who's thinking about launching their own SaaS product or SaaS platform? What advice would you give them?
So not having done that and being done that, saying started with a services business, right? I've talked to a few people who have done that, and I've heard there's a long line of gravestones for that attempt, right? That's what I've heard. The people I've talked to are success stories, and they pretty much have said, hey, I was running this services company. Like, I talked to a gentleman who's another portfolio company of our lead investor, and he was running an MSP, an IT services business, for almost 20 years, right? And he's like, we were doing great. We had this great business out west, and life was good. And we decided to launch this SaaS product. He's like, it became very challenging because we were trying to keep the services going, but write the SaaS product at the same time. And eventually, he had to cut the cord. Eventually, they had to abandon the services business altogether and go all in on the SaaS product. And he's like, we went from doing really well and I had a really nice life to being like a starving entrepreneur again, like I was back in the first year of my MSP business, 20 years ago. And so, I've heard that's a challenging thing. We went the other way, right? We started only with product, right? And technology, and just building a SaaS product. And then the market demanded from us service delivery. And so then we built services on top of it, which I felt was an extremely easy bolt-on and far easier transition than the other way. Because then we just had to build our product to help deliver the services, and we were already used to building the product, right? And so that was an easier transition.
So what was the first product that you actually, obviously when you set out to build Ad Lumen, what was that first product going to be?
Not the product we have today, as is common in, I think, entrepreneurship, right? Initially, back in 2017, user and entity behavior analytics was like its own market segment. It was its own space. And so, I wanted to bring serverless analytics to the user and entity behavior UEBA market, the user and entity behavior analytics market. It turns out that later on, shortly after that market would kind of collapse and be like, look, this is really just a feature of larger products. It's not its own product. It's not its own standalone product, right? And so when that market collapsed, we had to make a change into kind of what we are today, that command center for security operations, which meant bringing in a ton of other capabilities and delivering those capabilities through our platform. And then we were just delivering, security operations software. And then we said, okay, now we need services delivery through our security operations software. And then it kind of grew and developed from there. But the original idea in 2017 was user and entity behavior analytics. That market totally collapsed, and we had to make a big change.
I want to talk a little bit about the sales side of it. I'm assuming one of the toughest bits of launching a young vendor like that is actually getting people to have the confidence to buy into the solution. What was the most exciting sale during those early days that really changed the trajectory the business was going on?
So the first 10 customers are the hardest, right? And then it's still kind of a slog. And then after you reach some critical mass, many hundreds of customers later, it doesn't feel much like a slog anymore. I think the trajectory of the business, like many businesses, when you first start, I don't think you can go directly into the channel. It's probably possible from the very get, but it depends on your product. We just went out there and started trying to sell it, right? We started racking up a few customers. We ended up getting really heavy into the banking industry. And if I had to give anyone any kind of real advice on starting a company, is in the early days, sometimes it's okay to think small. And what I mean about that is really focus on an industry. You have limited resources, right? You only raise so much money. You can only focus those resources in a specific area. And for us, that was really targeting banking, like community banks, credit unions, kind of community financial institutions. And we were able to build a product that was really meaningful for them. We developed some special software for them, compliance, regulatory reporting for them that was truly unique to them. And we built a very meaningful, very unique product for them, and it sold really well. And that allowed us to garner enough scale to where we said, okay, now we want to go in big on a channel go-to-market strategy because we're ready. We're ready for more resources. We have product market fit, like the product's matured, it's defined, and we're ready. And then we went in, we built a channel go-to-market program, went 100% into the channel, and we were just ready, and it took off.
Can you tell me about the most memorable sale during that time?
The most memorable sale. There were many sales. Obviously, I remember my first sale is obviously the most memorable sale. The check, the first time you get a check, I walked, it was too big to cash via the mobile app. So I walked like 2 miles to the branch to go cash that thing in. And that's probably my most memorable sale for sure.
So really it comes down to the value of the sale rather than the actual process.
Yeah, well, I mean, the process was certainly a customer that was an early adopter and willing to take a risk. And he's like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, let's see what you got, right? And let's do it. And they came in really early on Ad Lumen, and they're still customers of us today, like 5 years later. And so it's really, it started with them.
What's exciting you the most about the future? And I think looking specifically at cybersecurity here.
Yeah, what's exciting me most is this. I think it's still a huge gap, and we work to solve it every day. But it's this concept that within the channel there are 3 customers: the end customer, the partner, and tech-enabled services. And you've got to build a platform that all 3 can live and work and have equitable access to data and reporting, and have all these things within a single user interface. And that's a challenge, right? Because you don't want people stepping on each other's toes. You need like defined roles of who is going to be allowed to do what and when, and making sure you're not stepping on each other. And so I think what's exciting about this mostly is it gets the partner more involved in the process. Many of these products, they're just coming through as resales. They're just pass-throughs, right? Like, okay, sell the product through, take my margin, thank you very much. But there's revenue, I think, left on the table for the MSP, because the end customer want more tech-enabled services. They want more. Right? They want more, and they want more than I think what just a SaaS vendor can deliver for them. They want what a SaaS vendor truly partnered with a managed service provider can deliver together as a unit. And in order to do that, you've got to give them all a place to work and do things within a single platform. And so when that really achieves maturity, I think that the partner ecosystem is gonna really transcend and move to another level.
I'd like to explore that bit around the equitable access to data that you've mentioned a few times. What does that really mean to you?
It means to me that the MDR, or the tech-enabled service, right, has a certain level of access to be able to run queries and searches and produce reports and do all of those items. The end customer has those same requirements in many organizations. The end customer needs to be able to log in and do the same thing. And then the partner needs the same level of access and even more to deliver other services to be able to log into the same portal and do the same action items, sometimes even on behalf of the customer. And so that's what I mean by equitable access to data and reporting. Many solutions today is they have a good channel model and they have a channel program, and partner cuts its margin and customer gets the product, and then that's it. They just bought like this black box solution that they can't really get in there and dig into anything. They just receive reports and they have someone to call, but they can't do anything with the product, right? It's just fully managed, right? And so fully managed and isolated, I would say, right? And so that's not going to work anymore. That dynamic has to change, and you make it harder, I think, on the SaaS vendor if you don't equip the MSP and enable them to do more work and better work on behalf of their end customer. Because after all, like, even though yes, it's being passed through, like, that's their customer, that's the partner's customer, and we deeply respect that relationship. And we want to make sure that that partner looks good and is able to really do a good job on behalf of that end client, regardless of the fact that it's being serviced through our portal.
Yeah. So I started this podcast with the main goal of encouraging MSPs and technology partners to think about the challenges their clients are most likely facing and how they can solve them. But ultimately, that's all about unlocking these new revenue opportunities. You mentioned earlier that you think there's a lot being left on the table still by the MSPs when it comes to security. What do you think is the secret to unlocking those conversations with their clients to really get them thinking about increasing their cybersecurity spend?
Many cybersecurity attacks can just be thwarted through secure configurations, best practice configurations. And so these best practice configurations are time consuming. They are a lot of things. They are also just hard to do from the get-go if you don't have the visibility into those things that you're supposed to be configuring and how you're supposed to be configuring them. So I think in large part, the revenue that's really being left on the table is being able to provide, and that takes service delivery, right? So the Ad Lumen product goes in, it detects all this stuff on the proactive side, like all that stuff's got to be fixed, and many times it takes business decisions and it takes service delivery in order to do that. Then of course there's the MDR component of it as well, which is different. But the revenue that's being left on the table is through any product. Once it goes in, there's ancillary tasks that have to be completed, right? And it takes an MSP to be able to complete those, or a VAR to be able to complete those. And so, that is what they're leaving on the table, because it's just not being done now at all.
But I think in terms of the conversation, like if I take myself back to being the MSP owner days, I can't just call my client and say, hey, we want to do some more configuration on your Microsoft 365 environment. Here's a quote to do it. With the goal here really is, let's say the client's spending $200 per user per month on our managed services. We want to take that up to the next step. Maybe it's $250 per user per month. What would you take to the client to encourage them to start kind of having that conversation that results in spending more money?
Yeah. One, you've got to take a realistic business need to them, right? You've got to take like a realistic problem. In security, I think there are no shortage of realistic problems, right? And so as long as you have that, you can build a more profitable service by just bolting on an extra premium, or even another security operations task like patch management, or vulnerability scanning. Many of these MSPs are doing these other security operations tasks. Some of them aren't. Some of them aren't because of a licensing perspective, and where Ad Lumen kind of delivers that one app, one license concept, makes it very easy. We can use the patch management solution, or you can just license it kind of through us, through our portal, and then you can deliver the fully managed patch management as a service. And so it's not a hard upsell if I feel like if you're selling defined category services that you weren't selling before. And there in security seems to be an endless number of SecOps tasks that every organization must just complete, like especially regulated ones. They don't even have a choice. They have to do it, right? So that's the keys: identifying the need and then seeing if you've got that in your line card. And if you don't, or you only have some component of it, how can your vendor help you deliver the rest of it? Or if you need, deliver all of it and provide an additional revenue stream to you.
Makes sense. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today. I've definitely learned a lot. I've got just over 2 pages of notes on my desk, which I keep glancing down at. If people want to find you or connect with you afterwards, presumably they can look you up on LinkedIn, Robert Johnston.
Yep.
If they want to know more about Ad Lumen, it's adlumin.com.
Yes, sir.
And any other ways to connect?
No, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can just Robert Johnston on LinkedIn, CEO of Ad Lumen, or you can come to adlumin.com and put in a request, see a demo if you want, or just reach out on the contact page and get in touch with me.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it, everyone. If you learned something today or laughed, please do tell someone about the podcast. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you want to get more from today's show, check out the show notes and share this episode with a friend. Earn, grow, and manage revenue quickly and cost-effectively in the Zomentum Revenue Platform. To learn more, check out zomentum.com. See you in the next episode.